to the next level. Now, as you're probably already aware, I'm Jayne Scarman, the digital marketing manager at Jayne, but we have actually swapped sides for this bit.
Just to try and use you.
It's really similar in those pictures. Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah, we did do this whole kind of bit of a skit, didn't we, with the clients when they were in? Because we're so similar, we've even prepared a Venn diagram for your enjoyment.
This is not everything.
This is just the really obvious thing.
Yeah.
The important stuff.
But yes, we do both quite like a bit of email marketing, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. So yeah, we do have quite a similar presenting style as well, so if that gets confusing or kind of distracting, then I apologise. Stop it. But anyway.
So why are we here then? Well, we're talking about email marketing today because essentially everyone loves an email. So across almost all age groups and demographics, people say they prefer companies to communicate with them via email than any other method. So it's a bit of a no-brainer when it comes to customer communications. It's also been shown to deliver 21 times its original investment, so it's really good value for money. And lastly, 90% of customers say they will subscribe to a trusted brand. So if you have a fully opted-in database, you know you've got people who really care about your company.
But there are some challenges as well. About 50 to 75% of all emails sent are classed as spam. And what's defined as spam is kind of changing as well. As email filters and spam filters and things get better, you lose out all of the Nigerian princes and you start redefining spam as what the user considers spam when they receive an email. So anything that's unwanted, anything that's irrelevant. You can see there's quite a big range on the board here, but 45% of people say that they'll unsubscribe if they have a bad customer service with your brand. That's nothing to do with that particular email you've sent. So you have to start thinking bigger picture. And with the GDPR and data regulations that are coming in next year as well, your emails just have to keep getting better and better to pass muster, basically.
So we're going to be covering how good are your emails, so what makes an email perform well and how you should measure it, and how good is the database and how to keep that subscriber list in tip-top condition. We'll show you some email fails, including some big boys who got it very, very wrong. Then we'll do a roundup of the legalities, focusing on the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations, coming in next May, and how that's going to affect email marketing, which is really important for us. And then we'll finish off with some tips to make your emails work harder and some new things that are coming up in the future, which we might want to incorporate.
But in truth, super dream style, we have got a little quiz, so you work a little bit for your lunch. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. But we just thought it'd be quite interesting to get your opinion on how well you think we do for email marketing for our customers, like versus what the clients thought. They were a bit quiet in the session, weren't they? I think we probably overwhelmed them. But yeah, if you want to have just a look and a think as you go through and tell us what you reckon at the end, that would be quite interesting. But yeah, we'll start with how good are your emails, and probably measurement is the first thing to think about. When you measure email marketing, it tends to be in these three categories. So your positive engagement is your opens, clicks and shares. Your negative engagement is unsubscribes and complaints. And your deliverability is how many emails get through, which is usually measured in terms of bounces, soft bounces and hard bounces. Hard bounces are your lost causes, they're uncontactable people. You sent them an email, they don't exist anymore. Soft bounces can be down to you as a sender and how kind of your sender reputation is, and it can also be down to your recipient and whether they're able to receive your email for lots of different reasons. We'll go into deliverability a little bit more later, but how good is good? So what's a good open rate? Oh, you can see it does vary quite a lot. On the back of that handout's a full table of all of the main industries that are tracked by email benchmark reports. But you can see on the screen it does vary quite a lot. So 16% open rate for e-commerce, 28% for hobbies. You can see we're about here at 22%. But it just shows you how you need to kind of swat up on how you compare. You need to know your marketplace and what to expect within it.
Okay, so how do we go about increasing that positive engagement and getting people to actually open and read your emails? Well, the first thing to do is to think customer first. What do you already know about the customer and what is it that they would like to receive? So that's going to help you shape the content of your email. Because as I'm sure you're aware, if you get an offer for an offer via email for a product that you've already bought, you're going to be pretty much turned off by that because you can't Similarly, if it's a B2B market and someone's working in aerospace and you send them information about your services for automotive, they're not going to be interested in that email, they're not going to open it, they're not going to read it. The next thing to do is to think about full customer journey. So an email is no use to anyone if it doesn't go anywhere. So you need to think about what you want people to do as a result of that email. So if you want them to sign up to something, send them through to a sleek, well-designed landing page. It's got all the information they need and it doesn't distract them. That way you're creating a really positive experience for them about their brands. You're not leaving them feeling disappointed. And then finally, think about what the trigger for the email is. So emails are shown to be more successful if they relate to a particular point in time or to another event. So for example, if you want to send a follow-up email asking for feedback after an event or to say thank you, it's obviously going to have a much better response if you do it the next day than a week later. Similarly, if someone's been on your website and they've perhaps downloaded a piece of content, if you follow that up with some more helpful tips, that's likely to get a good response rate. The negative engagement is all about how spammy or intrusive your emails are. And it's basically trying to avoid tactics that mean that someone doesn't open, doesn't read your email, or even so that they don't mark it as spam or unsubscribe from you. And there's a couple of different factors here. So the first is relevance, which is essentially the inverse of everything I've just been talking about. If that content isn't relevant to them, they're not going to be interested, your email's going to perform badly. Then there's timing. If you're sending out too many emails, if you're spamming people every day, people are going to quickly get bored, as I'm sure you do yourself, and they're going to unsubscribe or mark you as spam. And the same goes for repetition. If you're sending out the same kind of content, the same emails all the time, you're going to lose engagement with those emails. And then the final thing is about display. And this is actually about how emails appear when someone receives them. Now, you might not know this, but there are actually 15,000 potential renderings of every single.
So, as promised, let's talk a bit about deliverability. As I mentioned, there's some things that you can affect and some things that you can't. So, your sender might have a full, your recipient might have a full mailbox. They might have server issues. Their domain name might be having issues. You might not be able to get through to them. But in terms of things you can affect, which, let's face it, are a bit more interesting, the first thing to look at is your email quality, which really follows on from everything Jayne's been saying. If you've got a good quality, well-coded email, you're more likely to get to someone's inbox. You'll appear as less spammy, more genuine. You also need to think about the content you're putting in there. There is a blacklist of terms that you should try and avoid. I know we've had this with cooks where we've tried to avoid saying free or % off lots and lots of times in the email because it can set off spam filters. And finally, you have to think about image to text ratio. If you have loads and loads of images in your email and not very much text, you can sometimes appear as spammy. It's a little bit kind of contentious, this issue, because some people reckon it doesn't actually affect deliverability that much. But what we would recommend is don't have lots of images with the text kind of as part of the flat JPEG. Try and make it so that you can read that HTML text. And then we get to the complicated bit, which is database cleanliness and sender reputation. These two are really interlinked. If you have a bad database, then your sender reputation will inevitably be compromised. So you can imagine if you have a lot of bad data, loads of people who don't exist or aren't actually interested in the content you're sending, they're not going to respond to the emails, they're going to junk them, they're going to mark them as spam. If you're marked as spam and you're considered as spammy, your sender reputation goes down. If your sender reputation goes down, you're more likely to be marked into spam filters the next time you send. So you can see how it's a bit of a vicious cycle. You really need to think about how you collect your data and maximise your chances of getting through in the first place by collecting the right data. Which leads us on to how good is your database? So data collection is pretty much an art of knowing what information you can ask for in return for the services or information you're providing. You'll all be aware that the average e-newsletter subscription form probably only asks for your email address. That's about it. But if you're offering a key piece of information or an incentive or an offer of some kind, you might be able to trade for a little bit more information from the person you're trying to get to sign up. But essentially you only want to collect information that's useful and relevant to you. So as a B2C customer, you've probably been asked for your birthday before, so people can send you like birthday offers or little messages and things. But as a B2B company, you're never going to use that data. It would probably be a bit creepy if you did and put off your customer. So you're never going to use that information, don't collect it. You also need to think ahead for what information you might need, not just for next month's newsletter, but the big campaign you've got coming 6 months down the line. Do you want to do some personalisation in it? You're going to have to ask people for their first names. Make sure that all of the fields in your form are mandatory, so you're actually collecting data and you don't end up with a database where you have half the information for half the people. But that kind of leads on to how you collect your data. And there are 4 easy steps. You'll be pleased to hear. The first one is getting that form right. So the form needs to ask for a proportionate amount of data. Don't ask for too much or too little. It needs to ask for it at the right point in time. So when people are engaged, when you know that they're already interested. And thirdly, it needs to set expectations. So when people subscribe, tell them why they should subscribe. What's the benefit? Tell them how often you're going to contact them and what information you're going to contact them with. Which leads us on to verification and authentication. You've probably all experienced this as well. 2-step verification when you sign up to a list goes something like you'll put your email address in, they'll say we'll send you an email address to an email to verify, you click on a button in that email and then, and only then, are you added to their database. So as a customer that can be a little bit of a long journey. I know I found it a bit frustrating before, but as an email sender it's really, really powerful. It means that the bad data never gets onto your list in the first place. It means that you know you're collecting the email addresses of people that are active, that they're using that email address, which is quite powerful. It's only polite to say hello. Welcome emails are your big chance to make a good first impression. They're 4 times more likely to be opened and 5 times more likely to be clicked than an average email campaign. So use that opportunity. Ask people to whitelist you or add you to your address book, for instance. Ask for a bit more information about who they are and what they'd like to read. And finally, you've got to live up to your promises. This is a kind of easily said and hard to do kind of situation, but you set those expectations. You know that people are expecting to hear from you twice a month and only about offers, sales, or only about France, for instance. You've got to live up to what you've set out in that first subscription form.
Okay, so that talks about collecting data, and it's also really important that you give your database a bit of TLC as you're using it over the years. Because you might not be aware, but data actually decays at around 35% a year. So that means every 12 months, you're losing about 1/3 of your entire database. And that's maybe because they've changed their email address, they've moved jobs, or they're just not interested in what you do anymore. But all is not lost, because there are various tactics for rejuvenating that database. So the first thing to do is actually to have a good old spring clean. So you might be seeing more and more bounced emails coming through. If you do, you should remove them from your database, because as Ellie has explained, that can be harming your sender reputation. And then what you might want to do is have a go at updating the list. So particularly if we're sending to a B2B market, you could have a look at those bounced emails and then try and find out whether that person has left the company or not, and try and find out who the new person is. Do some research on LinkedIn, company websites, and then make a personal approach, but that is key. Reach out to them and ask them as individuals if they'd like to join the database. Don't just add them, as that's going to be breaking the law. Then what you might want to do, having done that, is have a go at a re-engagement campaign. So that's sending a message out to your database to ask them, would they still like to hear from you or not? Now, I don't know about you, whether you've received any of these, but I know I have, particularly from clothing brands. If I've been responding to lots of product offers and then I run out of money and I can't buy them anymore, I get an email to say, are you still interested? Well, I would be, if I could. But this is a really, really good tactic because it helps you weed out who's interested in you and who isn't. So you would send them an email asking if they're interested, explaining what the benefits to them will be, of course, and what to expect. Then if they say yes, they're interested, fantastic. You've got someone who's really, really interested in your brand, and that's a really powerful marketing tool. If they say no, you must respect them and take them out of the database. And if they say nothing at all, then you should remove them as well, because they're not interested, they're going to continue not engaging with your emails. And believe me, if they are interested further down the line, they will resubscribe. So the result of all of that is probably going to be a much smaller database, which is quite a scary prospect for us as marketers. But actually, it's a really powerful thing because then we know everyone is really interested in what we're doing. But if you do want to grow that database again, you can then, of course, go out and seek new data. So you might want to add or tweak a sign-up form on your website, capture data at events, or maybe produce some kind of content that's irresistible to people and that they will be willing to part with their email address in order to get. But crucially, don't ever, ever be tempted to go and buy data.
Okay, so before we get on to the legalities, we thought we'd share a couple of amusing examples of emails that have gone wrong with you.
So this is one from Google to begin with. You probably can't really see, which is kind of the point, that there's some very pale white text on a very pale grey background here, and there's links that don't work. So this is a classic example of an email that wasn't tested before it went out and it hasn't rendered properly. So even Google can get it wrong.
Next we have an example from Starbucks. They got a little bit trigger happy and sent out their spring menu before it was actually available in the shops. They have responded in the right way though, with a little bit of humour, a bit of humility. You can see the subject line, oops, we pressed send too soon. So they've gone out to their customers and said, sorry, hands up. We sent that out too quickly.
Then we have an example from Arriva Trains, and you might be able to spot what's wrong with this one. It's a fail in personalisation because it's gone to Silver as opposed to Josh. Thank you, Josh, for the example. So that's the case where they haven't got their database sorted out before they sent the email.
Here's an example of why you should think about full customer journey. So some of you may know me and Jayne went down to an email marketing discovery morning in London with a company called Sign-Up2 who do email send software similar to Campaign Monitor and MailChimp. It was a really good morning, we absolutely loved it. So when 6 months later they sent us an email saying, we've got a new email benchmark report coming out, are you interested? We went straight to download it and actually got an email inviting us to the same email discovery morning that we'd been to before. So they obviously aren't keeping track of past attendees, which was a bit of a shame for an email company.
Yeah. They should know better. Bless them.
Yeah.
And then an example that, quite frankly, is just plain wrong. So this is from Joe Malone. It's a Christmas treat email, but what they've actually done is attach the HTML file of the email to the email. Excellent. Written newsletter attached, helpfully, and have this rather spammy unsubscribe link appearing here. And that's the point. That looks like a spam email, doesn't it? Which is not what you would expect from a big brand like that.
And finally, we have to put our hands up sometime and say that we're not perfect either. Some people may be aware that Hannah's got a little Chrome lizard sitting on her desk. This is because we have a bit of an issue with the Cook's website not liking our email send software. Sometimes in the test emails, the tracking links that are put on the emails are kind of misinterpreted by the Cook's website and redirect all the links to the lovely medium lizard, which is unfortunately now taken off the Cook's website, so it doesn't exist anymore, we can't joke about it. But yeah, unfortunately this is something we've always picked up in testing. We know it happens every time, so we know to look for it, but it's kind of the bane of your life, isn't it, Tosh? So yeah, back down to earth with a bump to talk about the legalities of the GDPR. Surely you're all aware of the kind of heightened sense of, I don't know, like awareness generally about digital privacy at the moment. Obviously Theresa May is talking about internet service providers being able to stalk us and report back on what we've browse online. But Trump overturning data privacy internet laws in the US. But the EU is actually making a really good step forward in terms of individuals' privacy online. They're introducing something called the General Data Protection Regulations in May 2018, and it's to formalise what should be some fairly common sense rules about data privacy. Privacy by design is the heart of it. It's going to affect anything that they classify as personally identifiable data, which is email addresses and also cookies, quite interestingly, which will be fun. But we're going to talk today just specifically about email marketing, so how you collect data and use data after these rules have come into play. So when you collect data, as of May 2018, you can't have those really annoying pre-checked tick boxes that sign you up to lots of newsletter subscribe lists. You can also not have one that says, I do not want to, with a tick box. You have to get affirmative permission from people. Someone has to make an affirmative action to sign up to your list. You also have to disclose any third parties that will have access to that email marketing data. You also have to split out the terms and conditions for the emails and how you'll use them from your general terms and conditions. So they're really making it a lot more visible and open what your email is going to be used for and how you'll be contacted. Your details will have to be obtained via a sale or sale negotiation. So in terms of B2B, that could be meeting up at an exhibition, over the counter, phone calls, even like a LinkedIn message, something like that. But this is very much kind of a bit of a woolly topic of conversation, like what counts as a sale, what counts as a sale negotiation. But again, they're trying to make things quite common sense. So as long as we feel like as long as our clients feel like they're obtaining data in a very kind of personal communication way, then that should be fine. But it ultimately means you cannot buy data. You can't buy third-party data anymore and use it for email marketing purposes. This is something that's actually already in law over the pond in the US and Canada. So it's just a move in the direction that data privacy in general is going, but I know it's going to be a bit of a shock to the system for some people. When you come to use that data, there's a few rules that have come into place as well. So you need to have an opt-out or an unsubscribe in every single communication and at the point of collection. So watch out for those when you get emails, everyone. You must include your company name and your registered address in every single communication too. I think we do this on most emails that we send for our clients, to be honest, but we'll have to be a bit careful. One that I know Rashida were particularly worried about when I talked to them a couple of days ago about this was that you have to have had a transaction within the last 12 months in order to use someone's data. Yeah, Hannah's face. Now, when we say transaction, again, this is a bit of a topic of conversation. Lots of people are saying that can be interpreted to mean a transaction, not necessarily just a purchase, but a conversation, some kind of exchange of any kind, of communication of some kind. So
does it have to be two-way?
Probably, yeah.
So it doesn't count if we've spoken to them, but not potentially.
What I'm thinking is that if you've had a transaction in terms of you sent them an email and that they've clicked opened or replied or something, then that's fine. So email marketing pieces, if they're engaged with them, I wouldn't be worried. But it's all the people who aren't engaging regularly, that's the problem. You can imagine for Rashida, it takes more than 12 months for someone to decide whether they want to buy a £50,000 weighing machine. So it's going to be a topic of conversation. We're going to have to use email a bit more cleverly going forward, I think. It also becomes a bit of a nightmare in terms of record keeping and data collection. You need to keep records of consent for any data that you've collected prior to 2018 that you intend to keep using. So if people are on your list who you've collected any time before the legislation comes into place, you have to start contacting them now and saying, we need your explicit consent on record that you want to be talked to. And that also impacts us as an agency. So we are classed as a data processor for our clients, and our clients are data controllers. So they're the person who has ultimate ownership and control of the database, but we use it, we process it, we interpret it, and put it into kind of activate it in a way. So we are actually liable if there's any kind of issue, breach, or lack of compliance when working with our clients. So it's really, really important that we start thinking about this and working with clients on it.
How are we going to implement that? Because in terms of number 3, if we've got a database of 80,000, my client will tell me it's fine, they've all had a transaction within 12 months. And we know they're talking.
But that information must be in their CRM. We can't be liable for sending emails to them admittedly in that situation, as long as we've done our due diligence and tried to get that information out of them, then I can't imagine it would come back on us, but it will come back on them.
So what happens if you're caught doing these things then?
The penalties are pretty huge. So the 4% of turnover, or 20 million euros, is the biggest penalty that they will levy for anyone who is unrepentant, who doesn't make any changes, who isn't willing to cooperate. But it is a sliding scale.
Who is they?
The Information Commissioner.
The Information Commissioner's office. Yeah, the ICO.
Board.
In terms, I've had people say, but we're leaving the EU, what does it matter? But
I was just going to say, will it still affect us if
Yes, it will.
Brexit?
essentially, if any of your subscribers could potentially be located in the EU, it's based on the recipient's location. So if you're sending an email and someone could be living in Spain, for instance, or having like a holiday, if they complain whilst they're in the EU and they've received an email from you, then you need to be compliant. But to be honest, this is the way data privacy is going. If it's not what's in law here now, it's going to be in the next 2 years. We need to move in this direction. There's a good chance to get ahead, basically. So yeah, I had a similar reaction with all the clients as well. You can see all of their faces dropping and their eyes going. So yeah, sorry, don't shoot the messenger.
Okay, but aside from the really serious stuff, if we can recover from that bombshell of the GDPR, we're going to share with you some tips now for making email work even harder just before we go for lunch. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is personalisation. I'm sure you're aware of what that is. For example, when you get an email and it's got your first name in it, that's an example of personalisation. And these are a really, really powerful form of marketing. They've been shown to be 26% more times more likely to be opened, 2.5 times more likely to be clicked on, and to generate up to 6 times more sales. So it's a really effective technique. And even though we know the benefits of this, a recent survey showed that email marketers typically only use personalisation around about 50% of the time. So it's something that we probably really want to think about every time we send an email campaign, to try and shove in as much personalisation as we possibly can. Now, you can personalise pretty much anything in an email. You can, of course, do the recipient's name, you can do who it's from, you can change the text in it, the images, in fact, whole swathes of content. And all of that is powered by what you know about the recipients in your database. So you can use your database to get that information and build on that, say by adapting the form on your website, or sending out a survey to your recipients, or getting your email database to talk to your customer database and getting that data to work really well together. And I have an example for you that we do from Worcester. Some of you may recognise this. So this is a welcome email that goes out to people who sign up to their reward scheme. And we have lots of personalisation in here. So we have the from field up the top, which is the name and address of the technical sales manager that relates to them. We have that person's name in there and the recipient's name. We have a unique customer identifier, and we also have some contact information for that technical sales manager as well. And this is all powered by the database and gives us really, really good results. We're typically seeing open rates of between 45 and 70%, which is really excellent for this particular market. Then the next thing is about tracking. Now, you know how geeky I am and how I love a little bit of Google Analytics. Thank you, Aksha, for being with me on that. Now, what you can do with tracking is make your knowledge of your email campaigns more powerful. We've been talking about the simple measures of open rates and click-through rates, but by using tracking, you can actually get your emails to talk to your Google Analytics, so you can find out what they then do on your website. And most email send softwares will do this through something called UTM tracking, which some of you might be familiar with. And I have an example for you for Superdream. which is people who clicked onto our website from one of our The Quest emails. And thanks to that tracking, I've been able to isolate them so I can see exactly how they behave. And there's a couple of interesting things. So first of all, we included a story about email marketing predictions, and we found that the majority of people who read that were new to us. So 60% of them hadn't ever visited the Superdream website before, which is interesting. Whereas the one about recruiting the perfect account manager, only 30% hadn't visited the Superdream website before. So that was maybe more our clients. The other one was perhaps more our prospects, I don't know. But that gives us some interesting intelligence. I can also see that people who came through on the homepage typically spent around 6 minutes and viewed over 3 pages, whereas people who came in on one of those stories just read it and left again. So that gives us information then about what kinds of stories we should include in the email in the future, and also might help us segment who we actually send particular stories to. So it gives us a lot more insight and power in what we're doing.
Okay. So me and Jane love any kind of tactics that mean we don't send out blanket emails. As we've been saying, relevance, personalisation, all of those things are really, really important because email is such a private communication form. It can feel really intrusive when it's not done right. So depending on your database, you should be able to get some little bits of information already, even if it's just who reads every email versus who reads only a couple, who only reads the sale emails. But we can also make preferences more user-led. As I've discussed, you can ask people more questions and more information at that point of sign-up, as long as you're within kind of reason. So an example would be we were looking at some email marketing proposals for a website that sold like hen party gifts and things recently. And by just asking one simple question when people signed up on that website, you could really change the kind of engagement you got from your database. So you could ask whether people were the bride or the person organising. And by doing that, you could completely tailor the content very easily for those 2 different audiences. And that would massively improve the open rates, the click-through rates, and the even the transactions that you would get off the back of your email marketing. An example of kind of user-led preferences that we've done at Superdream is for the Yoshida blog. This was launched about 8 months ago. We send out sector-specific emails twice a month to a database that we've been collecting with now up to 400 odd subscribers in 8 months, which is really, really good. The client's very pleased. So when people sign up, we ask them for their name, their email address, their company, and then we ask them for sectors. Those of you who work on Yoshida will know that it's very, very sector specific. Each sector has its own kind of needs in terms of the machines and the little quibbles and problems that they have. So by doing this, we've actually had open rates of around 35 to 45%. Industry average for them is about 21%. So you can see it's a really, really big difference and has worked so well. Another thing we wanted to talk about was automation. So this is when you set up a little spider web of activities and triggers where if your subscribers or website visitors do a certain thing, they'll get an email in response. So common triggers are subscription, which would be a welcome email, abandoned baskets, which would be a little reminder email, and purchases, so you get your confirmation, your delivery details, all that jazz, RSVPs, so that would be kind of here are your tickets, or a reminder on the date of the event, that kind of thing. But for some companies, it's just any kind of sign of life at all. If someone opens an email, then please keep talking to them, and if they click, then good God, talk to them every day of the week for the next month. Which is unfortunately what I had with TripAdvisor recently, so I thought this was quite a good example. I was searching for some holiday cottages, and they started off really helpful. So they sent me a list of all of the ones I'd looked at with some kind of helpful information. Then when I booked, they sent me all of the details, and quite helpful that front. They sent me little kind of suggestions on day trips and things that I might want to go on, and then they started getting a little bit too happy to send me emails, and finally sent me this email on the right here asking me to review a cottage that I booked and hadn't actually gone to yet, even though I booked it through them. So they should have known when I was going. So yeah, this is when I actually decided to unsubscribe. But all of this was possible because I was using their app. So they could link my email address and my user preferences and my browsing habits through their app back to me and send me automated emails, which is really, really interesting.
Okay, so we're going to finish off with some final trends for emails of the not so distant future, which are things we might want to include in some of our client emails. So the first one is interactivity. One from Domino's Pizza, which I apologise if this makes you really hungry. We are nearly there, we're nearly at lunch. So this was to introduce a new range of pizza, and the email that you got was on this side, so it's a blank pizza board, and as you flick over the different flavours you get a picture and you get a description, and then there was a link through to order one, which is a much more interesting way of launching a new range of pizzas. So rather than sending someone to a PDF on your website, you can actually have a play with an email instead. I'm sure we all enjoy doing that. And then lastly is an example of e-commerce which didn't work very well on the day. We're going to have a go at this now to see what happens. No, it's not going to work either. So what it is you can actually get product choices within an email. So you can browse a particular product, choose the colour, choose the size just by flicking over it, and then actually go through and buy the product all from an email, which is a really interesting device that we might want to look at.
And finally, for anyone who's a bit techy and is interested in this kind of thing, I'm sure Josh Silver will tell you at length anytime you talk to him, but Outlook is one of our most hated email clients for testing. It is the most fussy, the most finicky, every single different version of it behaves in a different way. It's an absolute nightmare, but unfortunately, as most of our B2B customers have a high proportion of Outlook users as their end recipients, it's something we have to really get quite hot on. But there is hope. Microsoft has actually teamed up with the email testing software Litmus to see whether they can do anything to improve the way that these emails are rendered. So yeah, there is hope for the future of email. But we'll stop talking now. How are we all feeling? How well do we think we're doing at Superdream? Oh dear.
It's all going to change, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are any of those changes, could they affect us in PR? Because obviously we've got suppliers to massive media databases for our journalists, and we use emails effectively to sell in our features and our press releases and things. So we can send a press release out to 40 different people in a day. I know that's not email marketing, but does that affect our personal emails to journalists every day, these new laws? Or is it the people we get the data from, is it their responsibility, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, where the data comes from.
Because
And
we
it
do
sounds
that
like you're
every day.
sending personal email, you have a personal relationship with them,
Most of the time.
rather than having been added to a database.
Yeah.
That's the difference,
It's
isn't
mostly,
it?
it's for marketing purposes, so it's for, almost you should be sending people like a cold kind of salesy, you know what I mean? It's not quite the same if you're there looking for a relationship and a collaboration.
So there's
Yeah.
news stories and features, there's no transaction involved, there's no purchase. Does that kind of negate it?
Yeah, and it's
their job role though, isn't it?
exactly.
As a journalist,
Exactly.
That's how
you
we
expect on your to-do list is to receive
News
stories.
releases,
Yeah.
whether they're relevant or not is up to decide.
So
That's a bit
if we
different, surely.
So we pay the subscription to like a media database, and it'll say Bob Smith, the Telegraph, and give you his email address. And obviously we take all that data that they provide us, and that's why we pay them.
So
it's
in
their
that
responsibility
instance,
then.
they're the data controller and you're the data processor. So, I mean, admittedly, you can't, what would be wrong is if you then took those media contacts and gave them to us, and we sent out a
Yes,
blanket
kind of
email to them as
marketing
Superdream,
email.
as a marketing email. But yeah, it's,
Do you get what
There's
I
an
mean? Because we're
intent
doing
kind of
just
thing
internal
there.
way. Yeah.
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 Okay.
I think you're okay.
It's hot in here.
It's very
It's
hot.
hot in here.
We'll let you go.
Any
Thank
other
Slides round, please.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think it's going to be beneficial for someone tonight.
Good luck with